You ever see these images of students protesting in the streets and wonder, how did it even get to this point? Well, you'd be surprised. A decision made in a fancy boardroom in Washington, D.C. can actually be the spark that lights a fire on a campus in Buenos Aires or Lahore. And today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're connecting those dots, looking at the explosive link between global economics and student activism. So, here's the big question, right? Why are students in places from Pakistan to Chile suddenly walking out of their classrooms and flooding the streets? I mean, these are people who are literally investing in their own futures. So what's going on? Is it just about tuition hikes, or is there something way, way bigger at play here? And this right here, this visual really says it all. You've got the quiet, orderly lecture hall on one side, and on the other, the chaos, the energy, the roar of a massive protest. It's like two different universes. So what's the bridge between them? What's the force that can pull an entire generation of students from one world into the other? Well, let's dig in.
Okay, so to get to the bottom of these protests, we have to start with the spark, the thing that so often lights the fuse. And it all comes down to one powerful concept, really, austerity.
So what in the world is IMF austerity? Let's make it simple. Imagine a country is basically broke. It needs a loan, fast. So it goes to the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which is kind of like a global emergency bank. The IMF says, sure, we'll give you a loan, but, and there's always a but. The deal is the country has to go on a super strict financial diet. They call it tightening your belt. And that means the government has to slash its spending, sell off public companies, and cut subsidies. You know, the financial help that makes things like fuel or education cheaper. All those painful cuts, that's austerity in a nutshell.
And this is where you can see how it all unfolds. It's like a line of dominoes. It starts with the IMF loan. That loan forces the government to implement those austerity policies we just talked about. Now, when a government needs to cut its budget, where's one of the first places it looks? Yep, education. The education budget gets slashed, which means universities have to find money somewhere else, so they hike up student fees. Suddenly, getting an education isn't a right, it's a luxury, and that just makes inequality worse. And the final domino? Student frustration boils over. It's a straight line, folks, from that international loan agreement right to a protest on campus.
All right, so we've got the what, that chain reaction. But now let's get into the why. Why does this scenario so often end in protest? To answer that, we've got to put on our sociology glasses and look at some of the big ideas that explain how people act when they're pushed to the brink.
Let's start with a classic one, the Marxist perspective. Now, Marx basically saw society as a constant tug of war between the rich elite and the working class over money and power. So through this lens, IMF austerity policies aren't neutral. They're a way for the powerful to shift the economic pain directly onto poor and middle-class families. And what happens? Well, the university, this supposed place of higher learning, it transforms. It stops being neutral ground and becomes a battleground, a real front line in the class struggle.
Now, neo-Marxists build on that idea. They'd say that usually the education system kind of teaches us to accept the status quo, right? That the way things are is the way they're supposed to be. But when austerity policies hit so hard, it shatters that illusion. It creates what they call counter-hegemony, a fancy term for when people start to push back against the dominant ideas. Students look around and go, wait a minute, this system isn't fair at all. And suddenly their protest isn't just about tuition fees anymore. It's about questioning the legitimacy of the entire system and the government itself.
Okay, here's another great theory, relative deprivation. And this one is super interesting because it's not about how poor you are in absolute terms. It's about the gap between what you feel you deserve and what you're actually getting. Think about it. Students go to university with this expectation. I'll work hard, get a degree, and have a secure future. But then reality hits them like a truck. Fee hikes, a terrible job market, and a mountain of debt. It's that huge, infuriating gap between their hopes and their reality that really fuels the fire and drives them to protest. So we've got these theories, which are great for understanding the big picture, but what does this actually feel like for a student on the ground? Let's zoom in from the abstract ideas and look at the real, tangible impact this has on people's lives. And the consequences? They're huge. First, the quality of public education just tanks. At the same time, student debt skyrockets, which creates this constant grinding anxiety. Young people start putting off major life goals, like buying a home or starting a family. And all that pressure,
It can turn a student who just wanted to get their degree into a full-blown political activist. The campus completely changes its character. It goes from being a place for peaceful study to being the center of the storm, a real ideological battlefield.
This right here, this quote nails it. Education becomes a commodity, not a right. This is the fundamental shift. It's the move away from the idea that education is a public good that everyone deserves access to, towards a system where it's just another product on the shelf with a price tag. And for so many of these student movements, that philosophical change, that's the real gut punch.
Okay, enough theory for a minute. Let's see how this stuff plays out in the real world. We're going to dive into 3 specific case studies from Pakistan, Chile, and Argentina, and you'll see just how these dynamics look on the ground.
This chart is a fantastic way to see the global picture. Look at Pakistan. The trigger was super direct. IMF-backed subsidy cuts led to fee hikes, which sparked these massive student solidarity marches. In Chile, the fight is deeper. It's a legacy of the Pinochet-era privatization of everything, including education. For years, students have been in the streets demanding a simple, radical idea: free education. Then you have Argentina, where crippling inflation and budget cuts, made worse by austerity, led to huge organized strikes. They're not just protesting fees, they're challenging the whole neoliberal economic model. So you see the pattern, right? The spark is often the same: money, but the history and politics of each country give the protest a totally unique flavor.
But we have to be critical thinkers here. Is austerity really the only thing to blame? To get the full picture, we've got to ask, what else could be fanning these flames?
And this is a really important debate. On the one hand, you've got a super strong case for austerity being the main driver. I mean, it's direct, it hits students' wallets, and history shows the connection time and again. But you can't ignore other huge factors in the mix today. Things like identity politics are playing a much bigger role. And, of course, there's social media. The ability to mobilize thousands of people with a few clicks, that's a total game changer for organizing protests.
So, what's the verdict? Well, most experts would put it like this. Think of austerity as the dry kindling. It creates the perfect conditions for a fire. It's the structural trigger. But for that fire to actually start, you need a spark. And that spark is a combination of other things. You need students who are politically aware, you need strong leaders to organize them, and you need the right political moment, the opportunity to strike.
And this brings us to a really important shift in perspective. The next time you see footage of a student protest on the news, try not to just see it as a discipline problem or a bunch of rowdy kids. Instead, try to see it as a symptom. You're not looking at the disease itself, you're looking at the fever that tells you the system is sick. And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. When we see a campus explode in protest, is that a sign of failure? Is the university failing? Or is it possible that the campus is actually doing its job perfectly, that it's acting as the conscience of society, holding up a giant mirror to expose the cracks in the system? And maybe, just maybe, it's in those moments that they're fighting for a better future for everyone. Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.